Joining us this morning is Dr. Robert Sutter, an international affairs professor at the Elliott School of George Washington University. He has a PhD in history and East Asian languages from Harvard University. His government career has involved work on Asian and Pacific affairs and U.S. foreign policy for the Congressional Research Service of the Library of Congress, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Department of State, and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Good morning, Dr. Sutter. Welcome to News to Go. So you've worked at all of these agencies. So for a while, you were like the ultimate foreign policy insider, and now you're on the outside kind of having this unique perspective on what's going on in our part of the world.
I've tried to keep up with what's going on here. It's my area of specialization. I'm quite interested in it.
Okay, sir, there's growing tension in this part of the world. What are the prospects for war?
The prospects for war are very low. It's important for people, particularly in the Philippines, to see what the Chinese are actually doing. They're not resorting to military force. They're very careful to avoid this. What you're seeing is probes, and they're taking over pieces of territory with Coast Guard forces backed up by economic sanctions and diplomatic threats. And they're trying to intimidate people. But they're not resorting to force, because if they did, they might engage the United States. And China is very wary of getting into a confrontation with the United States.
Okay, sir, if I may just interrupt there and maybe, you know, address that question of China not using military force. I mean, recently, a Chinese ship has rammed a Vietnamese boat.
Right.
Filipino fishermen have been chased away by Chinese maritime enforcement ships.
Correct.
I don't know what you mean by military force, but for a lot of people in this region, I mean, that's the use of force.
It is the use of force, but it's done by Coast Guard civilian forces like the police. And this is not the Army or the Navy. And they're very careful to avoid the Army and the Navy doing this, because that would be an international confrontation which could involve the United States.
All right, but wouldn't, like, goodwill be part of your tools to gain control? I mean, diplomacy, goodwill, humanitarian...
Not in this case. Not in this case. And I think we've seen a graphic illustration of this with Vietnam. Vietnam has tried so hard, has such a systematic effort of engaging China on these issues, and the Chinese answered this by setting up that oil rig in the Paracel Islands, just a direct affront at Vietnam. And they got the reaction of great concern in Vietnam. And so I think we're at a stage where we need to understand what the Chinese want in this area, and they want control of this territory.
And they want control for various reasons. You mentioned the oil rig, but it goes way beyond that. I mean, this is about projecting...
The main issue is, I think, nationalism, sovereignty and security, but it's sovereignty in particular. And they've wanted this for a long time, and their capabilities are now stronger, so they're able to do it. Their Coast Guard is bigger. They're able to surround Philippine ships. They overwhelm them with...
And they're submarines.
Yeah, but there are no submarines involved. That's a military vessel. Be careful to watch. These are probes still. These are not direct attacks. But they're overwhelming the fishermen. There's no way they can compete with this. And so, and I think they will continue this.
Okay, so the other country that everyone's watching now is the United States.
Correct.
And there are people who are saying that, you know, the United States military presence is actually shrinking, while the Chinese Navy, for example, is growing as their economy grows. Should we worry about the U.S. commitment in this part of the world, despite President Obama's visit and, you know, the new military agreement?
I think you should look at this very carefully. Look at what the Americans do, and will they continue to do it? And what Mr. Obama is pledging and showing is that he will do it. He will maintain the presence here at the level that exists despite defense cuts in the United States, and increase the size of the forces here. And he will do that. And he will reintegrate the United States more deeply with the countries in the regions in a whole range of military ways. And the recent agreement with the Philippines is just an example of this kind of deepening American integration in the region.
Okay, but despite the U.S. naval presence in this part of the world, China has been doing these things.
Correct.
Has taken over Scarborough Shoal, has you know, rammed the Vietnamese ship, built oil rigs, built runways, you know, declared, you know, there's even a mayor for a big part of the South China Sea.
Correct. Very, very well. And so what the Chinese are doing are things that fall under the boundary of what the U.S. military response would involve. And as a result, it's a weak spot for the United States. How does the United States respond to this? And I think the way to respond is, as I see it, is to show the Chinese the cost of this kind of behavior. This is behavior that has to stop.
Cost.
The cost. And the cost to China.
It's not just economic cost. Political,
all sorts of costs.
Military costs.
Obviously, China has suffered tremendous reputational cost. But reputational costs don't matter that much to the Chinese when they deal with sovereignty issues. They're very tough on this. So it has to come in other ways. One cost is a deepening of the U.S. security presence in the region. As the U.S. deepens its military presence, China does not want this. This is a big negative for China.
So China's also provoking the United States.
Exactly. Well, they're provoking the countries of the regions to invite the United States to have a closer military relationship with them because of China and what it's doing. And we can go to China and say, we're deepening our relationships with the region. You don't like it one bit. We know that, but we're deepening it anyway because the countries in the region want that for reassurance purposes. And so we will continue to do that. But in addition, there probably need to be some other costs. And I'm not sure what they are now. They have to be very carefully calibrated because the goal isn't to confront China from the U.S. point of view. The goal is to reach some sort of an understanding where the Chinese will stop this kind of behavior. The U.S. doesn't take a position on the disputes themselves, but they take a strong position on the way the Chinese are carrying it out. They're very aggressive, intimidating, and coercive. And this has to stop. And I think it will stop. I think the Americans will increasingly take actions that will show the Chinese the cost and get them to calm down a bit on these issues. Not to stop their claims. Their claims will not stop. And not to stop their efforts to get control. But it will make them realize that by doing this, they're going to face costs in various ways. They already faced this with Japan. They have a major face-off with Japan now. This is going to go on for years. This is a big drain on China, and they're not going to gain very much by doing this sort of thing. Japan is going to become more active in Southeast Asia. It already is active in Southeast Asia. It helps the Philippines. It helps various other countries. That's a negative for China. And the U.S. is going to be active in this region as well. And so I think that these are aspects that can be taken to deal with the to show the Chinese government the cost of their behavior. And they will have to escalate, it seems to me, in order to show them. At this point, the Chinese remain very determined to move ahead. And so, we have to be firm on our side and cool-headed. This is a long game. It's very important to understand this. This is a long game. And we have to, and that's why the rebalance policy is very good, because it shows the Obama government is in it for the long game.
Rebalancing military forces, you mean?
Military forces, but not just military forces. Engagement with the leaders of the region and showing up at these meetings, like at the Shangri-La Forum. The defense secretary reads his critique of the Chinese, and the Chinese react in a very outrageous way. Good. That isolates China. Isolate them to some degree from a reputational point of view. Their behavior is wrong, and it has to stop. And I think that's the basic message.
Okay, China has been provoking the United States, and you said that the United States will be escalating its presence here, adding more troops and, increasing its visits by defensive. I mean, will there be a situation where the United States will go to war with China over South China Sea?
Will it possibly? This is, I think people are speculating this in the East China Sea more than the South China Sea. I don't think so. I don't think China will go to war with the United States. They are very careful to avoid confrontation with the United States. We had a much more dangerous situation with China in the Taiwan Straits crisis from 1995 until 2008. Both the U.S. and Chinese forces were facing each other head-to-head over Taiwan. One false move. We were on alert, they were on alert throughout this period. One false move and we could have had a conflict directly between the forces. That was dangerous. We got through that. Yeah. We got through that. I think we'll get through this.
Okay.
It'll be tense, but we'll get through this.
But as you said, the margin of error in these kinds of situations,
it narrows. It narrows. But you need to hold on to your stomach.
Yeah.
And
maybe pray.
And maybe pray, but it's not. We're not at the prayer.
It's not inevitable.
We're not at the prayer stage yet.
Okay.
It's where we have a long way to go before that, and it'll be tense. So we need to recognize we're going to have tensions, but that isn't going to lead to conflict, it seems to me.
Okay, that's reassuring. Anyway, I'm getting a signal that we need to cut to a live hearing of the Disaster Council. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much, Dr. Robert Sutter, International Affairs Professor at George Washington University.